What is your Uber horror story? I was finishing up grocery shopping when my phone buzzed with a text from my 4-year-old daughter, Chloe. Soccer practice running late. Can you order me an Uber home? I'm exhausted. I hesitated for a second because I usually pick her up myself. But I was still 23 minutes from the store checkout and another 30 from her school. She had a big math test tomorrow and needed to study. I opened the Uber app and requested a ride to our house, watching as it matched with a driver named Dennis Kowalski. 5-star rating, over 2,000. Rides completed. Silver Toyota Camry. The app showed his face clearly in the profile photo, a middle-aged man with glasses and a friendly smile. I screenshotted his information and texted it to Chloe along with the license plate number. Check his face when he arrives. Make sure it matches. Text me when you get in the car. She sent back a thumbs up emoji. The app showed Dennis was 8 minutes away from the soccer field. I went through the checkout line, watching my phone the whole time, tracking the disty 5 little car icon on the map as it moved through traffic toward Chloe's location. The app showed he'd arrived right on schedule at 6:23 p.m. 3 minutes later, Chloe texted in the car. He knew my name and everything. See you in 15 minutes. I felt relieved and went back to loading groceries into my trunk. My phone showed the route taking Chloe home. The little car moving along the familiar streets. I got in my car and started driving, planning to beat her home by a few minutes so I could start dinner. About 10 minutes into my drive, my phone buzzed with a new text from Chloe. My stomach dropped when I read it. Mom, this isn't the right driver. I checked his face. Different person. He's driving the wrong way. I'm scared. My hands started shaking so badly I had to pull over into a gas station parking lot. I opened the Uber app and looked at the route. The car was heading east on Highway 94, away from our neighborhood. We lived west. I called Chloe immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, but every call went to voicemail like her phone was off or had no signal. I texted her, "Can you talk? Are you safe?" The message showed as delivered, but she didn't respond. I watched the app and the car was still moving east, now passing exits that were nowhere near our house. I called the Uber support line and got an automated menu that made me want to scream. I pressed buttons frantically until I finally got a human voice. My daughter is in an Uber with the wrong driver. I gave them the ride details, and the support person said she'd contact the driver immediately. She put me on hold and I sat there in my car watching the little car icon move farther and farther from where it should to be going. After what felt like forever, the support person came back on the line. "Ma'am, we're unable to reach the driver at this number. Can you try contacting your daughter directly?" I told her I already tried and couldn't reach Chloe either. The support person's voice changed slightly. "I'm going to escalate this to our safety team immediately. Can you confirm your daughter's age? She's 14 years old." I was crying now, watching the car icon continue moving. It was already 15 miles from the school and heading toward industrial areas on the outskirts of the city. The support person said someone from the safety team would call me within 10 minutes, and I should also contact the police. I hung up and immediately dialed 911. The operator who answered asked about my emergency and I tried to explain everything coherently, but the words came out in a rush. My daughter got into an Uber. But it's not the right driver and he's taking her the wrong way, and I can't reach her phone. And the app shows they're heading east, on Highway 94. The operator asked for Chloe's full name, description, what she was wearing, and the car details from the Uber app. I gave her everything I had, including Dennis Kowalski's information and license plate. The operator said she was dispatching officers immediately and asked me to stay on the line. She wanted to know exactly where the car was right now, according to my app. I watched the screen. They just passed exit 34 heading toward Riverside Industrial Park. Still going east. The operator relayed this information to someone else, and I could hear radio chatter in the background. She told me police units were en route and asked if I could continue tracking the vehicle location. I said yes and kept watching the map while sitting in my parked car at the gas station. The car icon moved off the highway at exit 37 and started taking back roads through an area I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number and I switched over. A man identified himself as Gregory from Uber's safety team. He said they'd been trying to reach the driver's phone, but it was going straight to a disconnect message. He asked if I'd heard from Chloe, and I said no. Gregory's voice got very serious. Ma'am, we need to inform you that the registered driver, Dennis Kowalski, contacted us 45 minutes ago to report that he was assaulted and his phone was stolen. We immediately deactivated his account, but it appears someone reactivated it using stolen credentials and accepted your ride request. My whole body went cold. You're telling me my daughter is with someone who stole a driver's account? Gregory said that appeared to be what happened, and they were working with law enforcement to locate the vehicle. He said the car's GPS should still be transmitting location data through the Kong app. I switched back to the 911 operator and told her what Uber had just told me. She said officers were closing in on the area where the car was last tracked. The car icon on my app had stopped moving. It was showing a location on an unmarked road near some warehouses. The operator asked me to confirm the location, and I read her the GPS coordinates from the app. She relayed them and said units were approximately 8 minutes away. I couldn't just sit in a gas station parking lot while my daughter was in danger. I put the car in drive and started heading toward the last known location. Staying on the line with the operator, she told me not to approach the situation myself, but I couldn't help it. The drive to that area took 2 minutes, even though I was going 80 miles per hour on the highway. The operator stayed on the line the whole time, updating me that police were on scene. When I finally reached the industrial park, I saw at least 6 police cars with lights flashing near a warehouse. I parked and ran toward the scene, and an officer immediately stopped me. I told him I was Chloe's mother, and he radioed someone. A female officer came over and guided me to a police SUV where Chloe was sitting in the back seat wrapped in a blanket. She was crying and shaking, but she was alive. I climbed into the SUV and held her while she sobbed. She kept saying she was so scared and thought she was going to die. The female officer, who introduced herself as Lieutenant Rashidita Coleman, crouched down next to the open door and explained what had happened. Officers had arrived to find the silver Camry parked behind an 86 Tang abandoned warehouse. The driver had fled on foot when he saw the police approaching, but they'd already set up a perimeter. Chloe had been locked in the car, but unharmed. They were currently searching the warehouse complex for the work suspect. I asked Chloe if he'd heard her, and she shook her head. He didn't touch me. He just kept driving and wouldn't answer when I asked where we were going. Lieutenant Coleman asked if Chloe felt up to answering some questions, and Chloe nodded. The lieutenant pulled out a notepad and asked Chloe to describe exactly what happened from the beginning. Chloe's voice was shaky, but she walked through getting into the car. At the soccer field, she said the man knew her name and knew the destination address. So she thought everything was fine at first, but after a few minutes, she checked the driver's face against the app photo and realized they didn't match. The man in the car was younger, maybe 30 seconds instead of 50 seconds, and didn't have glasses. When she noticed they were going the wrong direction, she pretended to be texting friends, but actually texted me the warning. She said the man noticed her looking at her phone too much and told her to put it away. When she refused, he reached back and grabbed it from her hand. That's when her phone went offline and I couldn't reach her anymore. The man had thrown her phone out the window somewhere on the highway. Chloe started crying harder, remembering that part. Lieutenant Coleman asked if the man said anything to her during the drive. Chloe nodded and said he kept talking on his own phone in a language she didn't recognize. Not Spanish, maybe Russian or something Eastern European. She heard him say numbers and street names. At one point, he looked at her in the rearview mirror and smiled in a way that made her feel sick. He said something in English about her being exactly what they ordered. Perfect age, perfect size. Chloe started hyperventilating, and I held her tighter. Lieutenant Coleman's face got very grim. She said they needed to find this man immediately because it sounded like this wasn't a random crime, but something more organized. She asked Chloe to describe the man in detail. Chloe said he was white, maybe 30 to 35 years old, dark hair, no glasses, medium build, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He had an accent, possibly Eastern European, like his phone conversation. No visible tattoos or scars that she noticed. She'd only been in the car about 25 minutes total before police arrived, and he ran. Another officer approached and spoke quietly to Lieutenant Coleman. I heard him say they'd found the stolen phone in a dumpster about 3 blocks from where the real Dennis Kowalski had been assaulted. They had officers with Mr. Kowalski at the hospital now taking his statement. The officer also said something about the suspect's phone being left in the car, and their tech team was working on accessing it. Lieutenant Coleman thanked him and turned back to us. She said we'd need to go to the station to give formal statements. But first she wanted to get Chloe checked out by paramedics. An ambulance was already on scene and the EMTs examined Chloe carefully. They checked her vitals and looked for any signs of injury or drugging. Everything came back normal and they said she was physically okay. Just understandably traumatized. They offered to transport her to the hospital for a full examination. But Chloe shook her head violently and grabbed my arm. "I'm not leaving you. Please don't make me go anywhere without you." I told the EMTs we'd go to the hospital together after we finished at the police station. My husband, Nathaniel, arrived at the scene about 15 minutes later, having driven from his office downtown after I called him. He'd broken every speed limit getting there. He rushed over to the police SUV, and I saw his face crumple when he saw Chloe wrapped in the blanket. He climbed in, and we both held her while she cried again. Nathaniel kept asking if she was okay and if anyone heard her, and she kept saying no one touched her. But she was so scared. We stayed like that for a while until Lieutenant Coleman came back and said we needed to head to the station. She offered to drive us in her vehicle since my car was still at the gas station across town. Nathaniel rode with us, while another officer followed in Nathaniel's car. At the police station, they took us to a quiet room with comfortable chairs and brought Chloe some water and snacks. A victim advocate, named Patricia Whitmore, introduced herself and explained she'd be with us through the whole process. She had kind eyes and a calm voice that seemed to help Chloe relax a tiny bit. Detective Lawrence Kinsley came in holding a tablet and introduced himself. He said he was the lead investigator on the case. He asked Chloe if she felt ready to give a formal statement, and she nodded. He explained he'd be recording the conversation and had some questions that might seem repetitive but were important for the investigation. Chloe went through the whole story again, and Detective Kinsley asked very specific questions about timing, the route the car took, what the man said on the phone, and any details she remembered about the vehicle's interior. Chloe mentioned there was a strange smell in the car, kind of chemical like cleaning products, but stronger. She also said there were zip ties in the center console that she saw when the man reached for something. Detective Kinsley made careful notes about everything. He showed Chloe some photos on his tablet and asked if any of the men looked like the driver. She looked through about 20 photos and he stopped on one, saying that man looked similar, but she wasn't completely sure. Detective Kinsley thanked her and said that was very helpful. After Chloe's statement, Detective Kinsley asked to speak with Nathaniel and me separately. Patricia stayed with Chloe in the room while we went to the detective's office. He closed the door and his expression got even more serious. He said they'd been able to access the suspect's phone that was left in the car, and what they found was deeply disturbing. The phone contained messages in Russian, coordinating the pickup of a girl, matching Chloe's age and description from the soccer field location. The messages referenced a payment of $15,000 for the delivery. There were also messages from earlier in the day showing the assault on Dennis Kowalski had been planned specifically to steal his Uber credentials. Detective Kinsley explained this appeared to be part of a trafficking operation that had been using stolen rideshare accounts to target and abduct young girls. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down. Nathaniel's face went white, and he asked how many other girls had been taken this way. Detective Kinsley said they were investigating at least 4 similar cases in the region over the past 6 months where girls had gone missing after getting into rideshare vehicles. The detective said, "We were incredibly lucky that Chloe had the awareness to check the driver's face and send me that warning text immediately. Most of the previous victims hadn't realized anything was wrong until it was too late, and by then, their phones had been taken, and they couldn't call for help," he said. Chloe's quick thinking and my immediate response had saved her life. The FBI was now involved because this crossed state lines, and they were working to identify everyone involved in the trafficking network. He said the phone they recovered had contacts and messages that could help break up a larger, major operation. He warned us that this would become a very big case, and we'd probably be contacted by federal agents, prosecutors, and eventually, the media. He gave us his card and said to call him directly if we had any concerns, or if anyone suspicious contacted us. He also said they'd have patrol cars doing extra drive-bys at our house for the next several weeks as a precaution in case the suspect or his associates tried to retaliate. That thought made me feel sick to my stomach. We left the police the station around 11 p.m., and went straight to the hospital emergency room like the EMTs had recommended. The doctors did a full examination of Chloe, including blood work to check for any drugs in her system. Everything came back clean. The one ER doctor said Chloe was physically fine, but strongly recommended follow-up counseling for the psychological trauma. She gave us referrals for therapists who specialized in trauma and trafficking survivors. Chloe fell asleep in the gay hospital bed during the examination from pure exhaustion, and we let her sleep for about an hour before waking her to go home. It was almost 2:00 inches the morning when we finally walked through our front door. Chloe wouldn't sleep in her own room and insisted on sleeping between Nathaniel and me in our bed. We didn't argue. She held on to both of us and cried herself to sleep. Nathaniel and I lay awake most of the night, watching her breathe and trying to process what had almost happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the car icon on my phone moving farther and farther away. I kept thinking about what Detective Kinsley said about the other girls who hadn't gotten away. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. It was Lieutenant Coleman, saying they'd arrested the suspect overnight. A patrol officer had spotted Tim at a bus station trying to buy a wine ticket to Chicago using a fake ID. His real name was Viktor Antonov, 34 years old, with an expired visa and a criminal record in 2 other states for assault and identity theft. He was being held without bail on kidnapping and human trafficking charges. She said the FBI was executing search warrants at multiple locations connected to him, and they'd found evidence of at least 8 other girls who'd been trafficked through this operation. Some of them had been recovered alive, but others were still missing. The lieutenant said we'd probably be getting calls from federal prosecutors soon about Chloe testifying if the case went to trial. I thanked her for the update and hung up. Chloe was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice she hadn't touched. She'd heard the whole conversation and her face was pale. I have to testify. Her voice was small and scared. I sat down next to her and held her hand. Nathaniel came in from getting the newspaper off the front porch, and he stopped in the doorway. His face went white, and he held up the paper. The headline read, "Teen girl narrowly escapes Uber kidnapping, trafficking, ring exposed." There was a photo of the warehouse where Chloe had been found and another of Viktor Antonov being led into the police station in handcuffs. The article detailed how quick thinking by a local mother and daughter had helped police break up a trafficking operation that had been operating for over a year. It mentioned Dennis Kowalski's assault and the theft of his credentials. It talked about the other missing girls and the ongoing FBI investigation. My hands were shaking as I read it. Within an hour, our phone started ringing constantly. News stations wanting interviews, reporters leaving voicemails, the school district calling to check on Chloe and offer support services. Uber's corporate office called with an executive who apologized profusely and offered to cover all of our therapy costs and any other expenses. Detective Kinsley called to warn us the media attention would get more intense, and suggested we consider hiring a lawyer to help manage it. Nathaniel's brother knew a lawyer who specialized in victim advocacy, and she came to our house that afternoon. Her name was Justine Mallory, and she'd worked on several high-profile trafficking cases. She explained our rights regarding media requests and helped us draft a statement asking for privacy while Chloe recovered. She also started looking into what legal recourse we had against Uber for their security failure that allowed someone to reactivate a stolen account. Justine explained that while Uber had policies in place, the execution had clearly failed in this case. She suggested we might be able to pursue both criminal restitution from Viktor Antonov and his associates and civil action against Uber for negligence. She said other families of trafficking victims would probably join us in a class action suit. Over the next week, the case exploded in the news. The FBI announced they'd arrested 6 more people connected to the bad trafficking ring, operating in 4 states. They'd rescued 3 girls who were being held in various locations and were working to identify and locate 5 more who were still missing. Special Agent Francesca Diaz from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force came to our house to interview Chloe again. She was gentle but thorough, asking questions about every detail Chloe could remember. She explained that the phone they'd recovered from Viktor had been a gold mine of information leading them to other suspects. She thanked Chloe for being so brave and observant. Agent Diaz also warned us that Viktor's defense, the attorney would probably try to paint this as a misunderstanding or claim Victor was just a driver who didn't know what he was involved in. She said the prosecution's case was strong, but we should be prepared for the defense to be aggressive if this went to trial. Chloe asked if she'd have to see Victor again, and Agent Diaz said possibly if she had to testify, but they'd do everything to make her comfortable, including using screens or video testimony if needed. Chloe started having nightmares every night after that conversation. She'd wake up screaming about being locked in a car or being chased through warehouses. Nathaniel and I took turns staying up with her. The therapist we found, Dr. Kesha Washington, specialized in childhood trauma and had worked with caught trafficking survivors before. She started seeing Chloe twice a week, using techniques to help her process what happened without being re-traumatized by talking about it constantly. Dr. Washington explained that Chloe was showing clear signs of PTSD, including hypervigilance, nightmares, and avoidance behaviors. Chloe refused to get in any car that wasn't driven by Nathaniel or me. She wouldn't even sit in the back seat anymore. Only the front, where she could see everything. She checked and rechecked door locks constantly. She wouldn't go anywhere alone, not even to the bathroom at restaurants. The school was very accommodating and let her make up the work she missed. They also assigned a counselor to check in with her daily, but Chloe's grades started dropping because she couldn't concentrate. She'd sit in class and zone out, staring at nothing. Her friends tried to support her, but didn't know what to say. Some kids at the school started treating her differently, like she was fragile or broken. Others whispered and pointed when she walked by. 2 weeks after the incident, a girl named Vanessa Kim approached Chloe in the cafeteria. Vanessa's hands were shaking, and she asked if they could talk privately. They went to an empty classroom, and Vanessa broke down crying. She said she'd been one of the girls who went missing last year. She'd gotten into an Uber after a cost movie, and the driver had taken her to a proshent, a house where she was held for 3 days, before managing to escape. She'd never told anyone except her parents and therapists because she was so ashamed and scared. But seeing Chloe's story and the news had made her realize she needed to come forward to help the Randers investigation. Chloe called me from the school nurse's office and I picked both girls up. We drove Vanessa straight to the FBI office where Agent Diaz interviewed her for 4 hours. Vanessa's information helped identify 2 more locations where girls had been held. The FBI raided one of them that night and found a 16-year-old girl who'd been missing for 6 weeks. Vanessa's parents called us later that week thanking us because their daughter had been carrying this trauma alone for so long. The prosecutor's office contacted us about a month after the incident. They wanted Chloe to testify before a grand jury to help get indictments against all the suspects they'd arrested. The grand jury proceeding would be private and less formal than a trial, but Chloe would. We still have to answer questions about what happened. Justine went with us to the courthouse and sat with Chloe during the whole proceeding. Chloe did amazingly well, speaking clearly and answering every question, even though her hands shook the whole time. The grand jury returned indictments on all counts for all suspects, including Victor. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Diana Okonkwo, thanked Chloe afterward and said her testimony had been crucial. She explained the trial would probably be 6 months to a year away because of how complex the case was with multiple defendants. She warned us that Victor's attorney had already filed motions trying to get evidence suppressed and would probably try to delay the trial as long as possible. That meant we'd be living with this hanging over us for a long time. Uber settled with us out of court about 8 weeks later after Justine threatened to go public with details about their security failures. They paid for all of Chloe's therapy indefinitely and agreed to implement new verification systems to prevent stolen credentials from being used. They also contributed to a victims fund that would help other families affected by trafficking through their platform. Justine negotiated a substantial additional settlement that would go into a trust for Chloe's future education and therapy needs. The amount was confidential, but it was enough that Nathaniel and I wouldn't have to worry about paying for the years of treatment Chloe would probably need. Victor's attorney tried every trick to get the mass case dismissed. He filed motions claiming the phone evidence was obtained illegally, that Victor's rights had been violated during his arrest, that he was just a low-level participant who didn't know about the trafficking operation. Every motion was denied. He also tried to get Chloe's testimony excluded, claiming she was an unreliable witness because of her age and trauma. The judge shut that down immediately. About 4 months after everything happened, Chloe had a breakthrough in therapy. Dr. Washington had been working with her on something called EMDR, a technique that helps process traumatic memories. After one particularly intense session, Chloe came out of Dr. Washington's office, looking lighter somehow. She told me she'd finally stopped blaming herself for getting into that car. She'd been carrying guilt about not checking the driver's face more carefully or not refusing to get in. Dr. Washington had helped her understand that she'd done everything right, and the only people to blame were the criminals who planned and executed the kidnapping. That realization seemed to lift a weight off her shoulders. Her nightmares became less frequent and she started sleeping in her own room again, though she kept a nightlight on and insisted we leave her door open. She started participating more in class, and her grades slowly improved. She even went to a friend's birthday party, though Nathaniel and I had to stay at the venue the whole time. Progress was slow, but it was happening. The trial date was set for 10 months. After the initial incident, Victor and his co-defendants were being tried together, which meant it would be a long, complicated trial, with dozens of witnesses. Prosecutor Okonkwo met with Tanga several times to prepare Chloe for testifying. She explained what questions would be asked, and what Victor's attorney might try to do to discredit her testimony. She did practice sessions, where she played the defense attorney, asking hostile questions so Chloe could get used to it. Chloe handled it better than I expected, staying calm and sticking to the facts even when the practice got aggressive. Justine would be there with us every day of the trial, and Dr. Washington offered to be on call if Chloe needed immediate support. The section trial started on a Monday morning with jury selection. We weren't required to be there for that part, but we went anyway, because we wanted to see the jury that would decide Victor's fate. The courtroom was packed with other victims, families, and media. Victor sat at the defense table in a suit, looking nothing like the dangerous criminal he was. He looked ordinary, even boring. Opening statements lasted all day. Prosecutor Okono laid out the entire trafficking operation in devastating detail, explaining how Victor and his associates had been using stolen rideshare credentials to target vulnerable young girls for months. She showed the jury photos of the victims, including Chloe, and explained what had happened to each of them. She talked about the girls who were rescued and the ones still missing. She showed them the financial records, proving Victor had been paid thousands of dollars for delivering girls to Mediterranean traffickers. Victor's attorney, a slick-looking man named Gregory Fine, tried to paint his client as a desperate immigrant who got mixed up with the wrong people and didn't understand what he was really doing. He claimed Victor thought he was just giving people rides, and had no idea they were trafficking victims. The jury looked skeptical. Over the next 2 weeks, the prosecution called witness after witness. Police officers who responded to the scene, the FBI agents who investigated the Stan trafficking ring, Dennis Kowalski, who testified about being assaulted and having his phone stolen. His testimony was heartbreaking because he blamed himself for not being more careful. Other victims testified, including Vanessa and 2 girls who'd been held for weeks before being rescued. Their testimonies were gut-wrenching. One girl described being locked in a basement and assaulted repeatedly while her captors negotiated her sale. Another talked about being moved from state to state and forced to work in various illegal operations. The defense attorney tried to suggest these girls were runaways who'd left voluntarily, but the evidence was overwhelming that they'd been kidnapped and trafficked. Chloe's testimony was scheduled for the 3rd week of trial. We arrived at the courthouse early and were taken to a private waiting room. Chloe was pale and quiet but determined. Justine stayed with her while Nathaniel and I sat in the courtroom watching other witnesses. When Chloe was called, she walked to the witness stand with her head up. She wore a simple dress and had her hair pulled back. She looked so young and vulnerable up there. Prosecutor Okono started with easy questions about Chloe's age, school, and soccer practice. Then she walked Chloe through the events of that day step by step. Chloe's voice was quiet but steady as she described getting into the car, checking the driver's face, realizing something was wrong. When Chloe described texting me the warning message, several jury members leaned forward. She explained how Victor had taken her phone and thrown it out the window, how he'd driven to the warehouse while talking in Russian on his phone, how terrified she'd been. Prosecutor Okono asked Chloe to identify the man who'd driven her that day. Chloe looked directly at Victor and said, "That's him." Victor stared back at her with no expression. The prosecutor showed Chloe photos of the car interior and asked if she recognized them. Chloe confirmed they were from the car and pointed out the zip ties she'd seen in the center console. After about 45 minutes of direct examination, it was time for cross-examination. Victor's attorney stood up, and his whole demeanor changed. He started asking aggressive questions, suggesting Chloe hadn't really checked the driver's face carefully, that maybe she was confused or mistaken. Chloe stayed calm and repeated that she'd specifically looked at his face and compared it to the app photo, and they didn't match. The attorney suggested maybe the lighting was bad or maybe the app photo was outdated. Chloe said the photos were completely different people, and she was certain. The attorney then tried to suggest that maybe Victor was just lost, and that's why he went the wrong direction. Chloe said he wasn't lost because he was following GPS directions on his phone and talking to someone about delivering her. The attorney raised his voice, asking how she could possibly know what Victor was talking about if the conversation was in Krudot, Russian. Chloe's voice stayed steady as she explained she heard him say specific words in English, including numbers and the word delivery, and he kept looking at her in the mirror while he talked. The attorney tried several more angles, but Chloe didn't waver. After an hour, the judge called for a break, and Chloe came back to our waiting room. She'd done incredible. Justine hugged her and said her testimony had been perfect. The rest of the trial took another week with more evidence and witnesses. The prosecution presented the phone records, financial transactions, and testimony from 2 of Victor's co-defendants who'd taken plea deals in exchange for testifying against him. They described in detail how the operation worked, how they'd identify targets, steal rid-share credentials, coordinate pickups, and deliver victims to traffickers. They explained Victor had been one of the main drivers and had successfully delivered at least 12 girls over a 14-month period before Chloe's quick thinking got him caught. The defense tried to poke holes in the co-defendants' testimony by suggesting they were lying to save themselves, but the physical evidence backed up everything they said. Closing arguments were powerful. Prosecutor Okono stood in front of the jury and reminded them of Chloe's testimony, of the other victims' testimonies, of the overwhelming evidence showing this was an organized criminal operation that Victor was deeply involved in. She asked them to deliver justice for Chloe and all the other victims. Victor's attorney made one last attempt to paint his client as an unwitting participant who deserved mercy. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts, including kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy, and assault. The courtroom erupted in tears and applause. Victor showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, several of Victor's co-defendants took plea deals with long prison sentences. The leaders of the trafficking operation were still being prosecuted federally and faced even harsher penalties. Agent Diaz called to tell us they'd identified and located 3 more missing girls using information from Victor's seized phones and computers. 2 had been found alive in other states, and 1 had tragically been killed. Her body found in a remote location. I had to process that information knowing Chloe could have been any of those girls. At Victor's sentencing hearing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Vanessa spoke first, describing how being trafficked had destroyed her sense of safety and trust. Another victim talked about the physical and psychological scars she still carried. Then it was Chloe's turn. She'd written a statement and practiced reading it with Dr. Washington. She stood at the podium looking small but strong and read her words clearly. She talked about how that day had changed her life forever. How she still couldn't ride in cars without panic attacks. She described the nightmares and therapy and how hard it was to feel normal again, but she also said she was lucky because she got away and some girls didn't. She said she hoped her testimony helped put Victor away so he couldn't hurt anyone else. She looked at him and said, "You tried to destroy my life, but I'm still here." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The judge thanked Chloe and then turned to Victor. Her voice was hard when she said Victor had shown no remorse and had been part of an operation that destroyed countless lives. She sentenced him to 45 years in their federal prison without possibility of parole. Victor would be an old man if he ever got out. The courtroom erupted in applause again. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded us asking for comments. Justine read a brief statement we'd prepared, thanking the prosecutors, FBI, and police for their work. We didn't take questions. Chloe just wanted to go home. Life slowly started returning to something resembling normal after the pneumonia trial ended. Chloe continued therapy, but the sessions became less frequent as she made progress. She went back to soccer and even tried out for the competitive team, making the roster. She started going to social events again. Though she was still cautious about cars and always checked drivers carefully if she wasn't riding with family. The school held an assembly about online safety and ride share awareness. After our case became public, several other students came forward with their own concerning experiences that hadn't risen to the level of what happened to Chloe, but were still red flags. The district implemented new policies about student transportation and safety. Nathaniel and I started speaking at parent groups about our experience and what we learned about traffickers' tactics. We wanted other families to understand the dangers and know the warning signs. We talked about teaching kids to trust their own instincts, to check driver faces against app photos, to have code words for emergencies. We shared how Chloe's quick thinking about texting me had saved her life. After each presentation, multiple parents would approach us with tears in their eyes, saying they'd never thought about these dangers before. Agent Diaz kept us updated on the broader trafficking investigation. The FBI had dismantled the entire operation and arrested 23 people across 6 states. They'd recovered 11 victims alive and identified 4 who'd been killed. The financial records showed the operation had made over $2 million trafficking girls over a 2-year period. The remaining defendants were all facing serious prison time. Agent Diaz said our case had been the break they needed to finally bring everyone down. She thanked Chloe again for her bravery and awareness. About a year after the incident, Chloe asked if she could write an article about her experience for the school newspaper. We discussed it with Dr. Washington, who thought it might be therapeutic if Chloe felt ready. The article Chloe wrote was powerful and raw, describing her experience and how she'd healed. She talked about the importance of trusting your instincts and speaking up when something feels wrong. The article got picked up by the local news and then went viral online. Chloe started getting messages from other trafficking survivors thanking her for speaking out. One message came from a girl who said she'd gotten into a suspicious Uber the day before, but remembered Chloe's story, checked the driver's face, and realized it didn't match. She'd refused to get in the car and reported it to police. They investigated and found another stolen account being used by people connected to a different trafficking ring. That girl's quick thinking, inspired by Chloe's story, had potentially saved her own life and helped police stop another operation. Justine helped us start a non-profit foundation focused on rideshare safety and trafficking awareness. We called it the Chloe Initiative. Even though Chloe said the name was embarrassing, we partnered with rideshare companies to improve their verification systems and security protocols. We created educational materials for schools about online safety and transportation awareness. We funded therapy for trafficking survivors whose families couldn't afford treatment. Within a year, the Chloe Initiative had helped implement safety changes across multiple rideshare platforms and educated thousands of students and parents about trafficking tactics. 2 years after the Batamist incident, Chloe was a complete different person from the terrified girl who'd been locked in that car. She'd grown taller and stronger. Her confidence had returned, and she'd learned to manage her trauma instead of being controlled by it. She still had moments of anxiety, especially around for cars and strangers, but she had tools to handle them. She'd started peer counseling at school, helping other students who'd been through traumatic experiences. Dr. Washington said Chloe's resilience was remarkable, and she'd become an advocate in the process of healing herself. Nathaniel and I were incredibly proud of who she'd become. She'd turned something horrible into something meaningful. One afternoon, Chloe came home from school and said her guidance counselor wanted her to speak at a state education conference about trafficking awareness. She was nervous, but wanted to do it. The conference was attended by hundreds of school administrators, counselors, and teachers from across the state. Chloe stood on that stage at 16 years old and told her story to a silent auditorium. She explained the tactics traffickers use, the importance of teaching kids to trust their instincts, and how schools can better protect students. She got a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of fine educators asked for materials and resources to implement in their districts. The Chloe Initiative website traffic spiked and we started getting requests from schools all over the country asking us to help develop safety programs. What started as a nightmare had transformed into a mission. We couldn't change what happened to Chloe or the other victims, but we could try to prevent it from happening to others. Every time we heard about a child who stayed safe because they remembered something from our program or checked a driver's face because of Chloe's story, it felt like we were making a real difference. Victor sits in federal prison where he'll likely die. The other members of the trafficking ring are serving long sentences. Dennis Kowalski recovered from his assault and now speaks at our events about being vigilant as drivers. The survivors we've stayed in touch with are on various paths of healing, some doing better than others. Vanessa graduated high school with honors and started college majoring in social work so she can help other trafficking survivors. Chloe is now 18 and a senior in high school looking at colleges with strong psychology programs. She wants to become a therapist specializing in trauma. She says her experience gave her a perspective and empathy that will help her connect with patients who've been through terrible things. She's grown into an incredible young woman with strength and purpose. Sometimes I still think about that moment when I got her text saying the driver was wrong. I think about how easily things could have gone differently if she hadn't checked his face, or if she hadn't texted me right away. I think about the other families who didn't get their daughters back. We were lucky in the most terrible way possible. That's the full story of our Uber horror. I hope sharing it helps keep other families safe and aware of the dangers that exist even in everyday situations we think are normal and safe. Check the face. Trust your instincts. Teach your kids to speak up. It might save their life. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So, subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.